Let me explain that using an example. We did a study in Germany on media constructs of climate change and how they are produced by interactions of scientists and journalists and how they are received by the audience. I will not talk about this reception aspect. And the result of, one of the results of our content analysis was that table. That table shows that politics and science are the main sources used in the coverage of climate change in Germany. NGOs, economy, and other do not play a big role. And you may expect a kind of division of kind of arguments used. You may expect that science delivers the facts. Politicians evaluate the facts and derive political actions out of these facts. This is a classical model, decisionist decision model usually applied when talking about the relationship of science and politics. However, as you can see from this table, science was not only the main deliverer of factual information, it was also the main producer of judgments. That means that is good and that is bad. That action is good, action is bad, and we can accept that but not that, and so on and so forth. And it was also a major source of demands, of political demands. We should do that, and politicians should not do that. And this, in a way, contradicts this traditional decisionist model of the relationship of science and politics, the model, by the way, which is not really considered in any way empirically sound by political researchers. So if we look at science, what we find here is a proof that at least the climate scientists take a political role in the public communication of the climate change problem. We then looked at how the coverage is produced in interactions of scientists and journalists. So we did a survey of scientists and a survey of journalists, and we interviewed pairs of those who had actually talked to each other in the course of reporting. And this is done several times, but this time we did not only look how do they like each other, which kind of expectations do they have towards each other, but we looked at actually the content. What did they negotiate? What did they talk about? And we tried to analyze these talks. It was, I must say, a rather rough study, and we are now having made a research grant proposal trying to go into the details of these negotiation processes between scientists and journalists during the journalistic inquiry. But nevertheless, we tried to do some analysis, looking at what did the scientists want to say, what was the information offered by the scientist, and what did the journalists want to know, what was the information demanded by the journalist. And we found a number of systematic distinctions or systematic differences in information offer and information demand. One was that scientists usually like to talk about their research. So they apply a research focus, while the journalists usually try to focus on the problem, let's say climate change, and how to make policy measures to fight climate change. And here is an example of that discrepancy between the two groups. So the message of the expert was, we need oceanographic climate research in order to adapt us to the future development. So the necessity of research is emphasized in what the scientist wants to say. The main question of the journalist was, are we better protected against storm tides today than we were in 1962? 1962 was a major flooding in Germany with many people killed. So the journalist wanted to talk about the problem of protection against storm tides, and the scientist wanted to talk about his or her research. Another typical pattern was that scientists like abstract information and journalists like concrete information. Actually, when I'm sometimes interviewed by scientists, by journalists, the question I most fear is, can you give me an example? So, I mean, as scientists, we like to talk about laws, general theories, hypotheses, and so on and so forth, which have a broad range, which apply in general. But if it comes to examples, to specific cases, we sometimes have our problems. I mean, the whole process of empirical research is generalizing empirical research from single cases to the general pattern, and that is what we like. Okay, here's an example. The expert wanted to say the change of circulation in Europe during the winter is a kind of climate change signal, very general, and the journalist wanted to know, is the weather in February 2002 an indicator of the beginning of climate change? Very typical, I think, this clash of different approaches. And the last thing we found, well, there were many things we found, but the last thing I will mention here is that as scientists we like to be cautious, to make vague statements, to do hedging. That is the term for that. Air pollution in industrialized countries could have impacts on tropic and subtropic regions. I mean, this is a statement. This is not really to falsify. That is always true. It could have effects, and we like those statements as scientists. Who would enable us to say, well, yeah, but we were not that safe about this when a contradicting example occurs. However, the journalists don't like those vague statements. They want clear statements. Are the drought in the Sahel and the floodings in China caused by an increase of anthropogenic aerosols? They want to know yes or no. And we want to say, as a scientist, we want to say, well, there are some indications that, if we keep, if we look for certain constraints, or if we exclude certain constraints, then this takes place, and so on and so forth. This is called hedging, and as scientists, I mean, this is to be honest. I mean, this is if we are not sure, we are required by our epistemic culture to say we are not completely sure. We think it is true, but we are not completely sure. And so if we summarize all these transformations that we think we have found in these interactions of scientists and journalists, we find some typical transformations that we label co-production of public expertise. Scientists like to talk about the research. Journalists want to talk about the problem. Scientists like to refer to general theories. Journalists like specific explanations. Scientists make scientific self-references. They refer to research, to more research required, and so on. Journalists want references to politics, everyday experience, and culture. Scientists want to make cautious statements, not always, but very often. Journalists like decided statements. Scientists want description and causal analysis. I mean, this is what science is about, to describe things in a very systematic way and to find the causal relationships between situations and variables. Journalists, however, like evaluation and proposal for action. And the main idea in that journalists have a role in the production of scientific expertise is that they put their sources under pressure in interviews or talks to relate their scientific knowledge to exactly those things the journalists want to hear about in order to relate the scientific knowledge to the problems that are meaningful outside science.